Previously on Tales from Tech Titans.
I'm sure there are many people that will get upset with me saying this. The methodization of project management. As soon as that happened, we suddenly had role distinctions and boundaries between what you're allowed to do and what not to do. Fundamentally, there are translation errors that happen all the way down that daisy chain, right? Be really clear on what is the outcome that you're trying to achieve. I learned about Wardley maps. So Wardley maps are essentially a way to understand that the journey of anything which has multiple parts. Parts can move forward and mature beyond their current state, but can't mature any further until something else in that chain also matures and moves along. I regret having ever stopped learning that period that I talked about, because it set me back so far.
I'm interested. Actually, what's funny, by the way, I'm just going to randomly interject into this. When I prepare for this podcast, and I say I prepare, Jess does most of the hard work on that, puts together these sort of wonderful run sheets and scripts. I've realized as we're talking that it's almost a kind of waterfall design, as in I kind of know roughly where the conversation goes, and we kind of script it around a bunch of questions and so forth. But as this conversation's evolved, it's turned agile, because we've kind of tacked in different directions.
And I'm anchoring you back and forward as we go.
That's right. So we're kind of playing with agile through this, which is just an interesting reflection as we go, and a learning. So thank you.
Well, the other thing is that because you told me what your three themes were, I already have the goal in mind. I know we're going to get there. I'm just sailing through the conversation.
So I'm going to sail back in a slightly different tack now then. So I'm interested because there was a period in your career where you went to Scotland. And so I'm interested in what took you to Scotland and why?
So the most wonderful confluence of circumstances came together. I had been working at Telstra, and at the time the CIO of Telstra was Patrick Eldridge. And Patrick, for those that know anything about his background, was one of the original CIOs of Seek.com, and had created digital native, Agile native back then. And when he took over the role at Telstra, he wanted to see some of that goodness be introduced into this monolithic organization, highly complex, very low tolerance for failure, particularly in the network. And I had delivered some significant results for Patrick. And then he had followed his career trajectory and got offered the global CIO role at the Royal Bank of Scotland. And it was a year after he was there that he learned that I was about to move on from Telstra. And it was a simple one-liner from him in an email that said, how would you like to come and help? He said, DevOps, Royal Bank of Scotland. And I turned to my wife and said, how do you feel about Edinburgh? And without even sort of raising her head from preparing the evening meal, she just said, yes. And now, I shared with you earlier that I had 4 children, 2 adult ones and 2 teenagers. Now, the adult ones were sufficiently old enough that it was a life opportunity to be able to not be present every day for them. So moving away was okay. And the younger 2 were young enough that they weren't so attached to their friendships and their routines. So it was a perfect confluence of scenario. So we suddenly found ourselves in 2016 flying into Edinburgh, looking at the snow-capped areas, going, wow, this is so exciting. And that's before you then start thinking to yourself, is there ever any sunshine in Edinburgh? But we overcompensated by traveling to many destinations from there, thanks to Ryanair and others. So that's what took me over. But this is probably the thing that I am most proud of in my career, because I had enough I was sufficiently back up the other side of the Dunning-Kruger curve to have a high degree of confidence in what I had learned worked well and didn't yet work well in helping change and shape an organization. Uh, when I arrived, I said to Patrick, um, "Do you just want me to stay in this small lane of DevOps, um, or can I address issues outside of technology automation, automated builds, deploys, releases, yeah, and so on?" And he said, "You can go as far as you think." So I seconded a room in the basement of Royal Bank of Scotland, which I then created what I called the strategy room. And I'll give a shout out to Martin Kearns, who you may or may not know is a very notable, I guess he's one of the old guard of Agile in Australia. He's one of the first people to be certified and practicing Australia. A brilliant and funny Irish friend of mine. Uh, Martin had told me about this concept he had created called I think it's called the strategy lens room. And what it's loosely based on is something known from the Toyota company's era called an Obeya room. And an Obeya room is essentially a place where you're able to visually represent the work that you're doing, not just in small team agile sense, but organization sense. What's the strategy? What are the goals? What are the initiatives that we're trying to that we've created, or the gaps that we can see that deliver those goals? What's the current state of those, and how are they delivering, and what are the outcomes that they're delivering? And what are the other key things that we need to keep an eye on in the organization, such as the KPIs that we talked about earlier? And so um, I loosely used the concepts he described to me to create this strategy room. And on one wall, I put all of what I called the symptoms of the organization. It's using a thing called, and I didn't have a label for it back then. I just knew what I was attempting to do. But the label I learned much later is called the physician's model, which essentially is what are the symptoms? What's your hypothesized root cause? What's your hypothesized treatment plan? And what are you going to measure to notice a change in the symptoms? And like a GP, just keep cycling around that. What did we try? Did that address? Has it healed? Has it not healed? Were there any bad side effects, etc.? And so I set up this this room where I had gathered data points and verbatims from all across the bank. And I would interview the executives and ask them what they thought was going well, not going well. I would interview their teams. I would even table bomb people in the cafeteria. They had no idea who I was. I'd just say, "Can I sit at your table?" And then as I start to it, I'd just say, "So, how's your day going?" And I would listen to the things that they would either complain about or celebrate or whatever. And all of that became the verbatims and the data points that went on one wall. On the next wall, it was what I hypothesized based on all of my experiences in the previous 5 or 6 transformative efforts that I've gone through. What might be the root cause of these things? Now, why are some of these things good? What makes them good? What's bad? And what are the things that we're still puzzled by that we don't know if they're good or bad? And what causes that uncertainty? And then on the next wall, I put up what I thought were the hypothesized treatments plans to magnify the things that were going well, address the things that weren't going so well, and perhaps illuminate information about the things that we were still unsure about. And then finally, what would we measure to notice a shift in those symptoms? And I brought executives down one by one, starting with my boss at the time, a guy named Ken Adamson, showed him the room. And it was interesting, the behaviors, and this is where I learned a lot, even more about the psychology of executives. They wanted to at first debate the verbatims and the data points. Oh no, that can't possibly be true. They shouldn't be feeling bad about that because that's not what's happening. And I had to stop them every time and say, it may not be your perspective, but that's their reality. And if that's their reality, then that's what they feel and the thing that drives their actions and behaviors every single day. So you are not allowed to debate the verbatims.
Yep.
You can add to them. You're not allowed to subtract from them. So knowing that that's someone else's truth, I would then focus them in on what do you think causes that? So we'd go to a hypothesized root cause diagnosis wall, to which I would take them through the things that I had observed myself and the rationales that I was putting forward. And that's where debate and build starts to happen. And then move them to well, if we now agree that those things are the potential root causes, what do we want to do about it? What's our hypothesized treatment plan? In which case they sometimes had a clear idea, and other times, and this is interesting, a lot of them just went, I don't know how to address this. Or I'm going to apply something that I had seen work somewhere else, maybe, but I don't understand why it worked, but why don't we try that? By taking them through that exercise, that gave me the credible license to go way beyond the boundaries of DevOps.
Yeah, interesting.
It gave me the license to then, when we invariably hit a crisis moment, and you need to have a crisis if you want to accelerate change quickly, never waste a good crisis. At the halfway point through the year, the organization had already spent its full budget in both CapEx and OpEx for the 6-month mark. Now, this, whilst it's quite a critical problem, is not atypical of organizations that suddenly find that when they do a financial check-in on how we're progressing, have a bad adverse reaction to where we're heading in the trajectory, and will do things like suddenly reduce costs in a hurry, right? Because they're trying to bring it down to the shareholder and board expectations by the end of the year. But as the size of the order of magnitude of this problem, which was really big, I think that from memory that at the time the CapEx spend was £1.3 billion per annum, and the OpEx was slightly smaller than that. And so you've got a very, very big problem to address. But for those that know the history of Royal Bank of Scotland, they had just recovered from one of the most catastrophic corporate failures in history, where they were the richest bank in the world, arguably, 1 week, and then bankrupt the next week because they had bought into ABN AMRO and the subprime toxic portfolios and assets that were in that, which meant that they had to be rescued by the Bank of England and the government, and were not just highly regulated, but everything they did had to be approved by their now government keepers and the Bank of England. So the organization had no tolerance for failure, a high understanding of risk management that was instilled, and they had already had a leadership program that were instilling the right behaviors in leaders, rather than those that had led to the collapse. That is, greed over due diligence and a number of other bad attributes. So when it got to the half-year mark, they were looking for answers from anyone that seemed to show an understanding, which meant that I was invited via not just Patrick's recommendation, but also a fabulously intelligent, brilliant woman named Jenny Wood, had also come a month later from Telstra over to help head up you call her the business manager of technology at the time, is the way I would describe it. She was the first person to be asked, well, how are we going to get out of this? And she said, Tony, it's time. Come and talk about this, get involved in this group. So we put forward, and were able to put forward, radical changes to the way in which we aligned ourselves to customer, the way in which we organized the people to deliver those outcomes, and the way in which we then improved process and automation and the impediments that kept in the way. That was agile at corporate scale, in the right conditions, and was brilliantly successful.
It sounds like we discussed earlier how you kind of crystallized your idea of agile. It sounds like this was then the manifestation of all that experience.
It was.
You had a rocked up. There was a business with enough of a problem there that needed this, and the conditions were true. You also
Yes.
come in with the endorsement, someone that's come into, I think it's CEO role that
He was the group CIO.
CIO, sorry. But he's also brought you in with that endorsement.
Yes.
So you come with that, you come back that credibility. Was there anything that you learned in that time in Scotland about maybe the kind of European approach, let's call it, to Agile that you hadn't seen in Australia that evolved your thinking or challenged your thinking?
Um, you're making me think rather deeply about this. I'm sure there was, but nothing that springs immediately to mind, other than, of course, organizations like ING and Spotify and so on had were getting a great deal of public attention. Um,
Yeah.
but all of the key elements of what they were doing weren't unfamiliar. They were just, again, and this is what I think people misunderstand the kind of nature of this. You can't just take what worked for ING and Spotify and bring it into your organization wholesale and do what I call paint by numbers. Artists that paint in the colors.
Yeah.
It looks like a picture, but you have no understanding as how you got there. So I'm not sure that there was any. That's not true. Excellent. You just allowing me to talk about it a little bit more. I've suddenly thought of it. So, like, I learned about Tinefin at that time.
Right.
I learned about Wardley maps, Simon Wardley. Wardley maps are a technique for helping organizations understand that um, if they have series of products and product stack, backends, middleware, etc., that uh, it's a way of helping navigate which one of those do you advance and recognize it's suddenly become a commodity. So we no longer need to be writing that and doing that. So it's, buy in something to do that. And so Wardley maps are essentially a way to understand that the journey of anything which has multiple parts. Um, parts can move forward and mature beyond their current state, but can't mature any further until something else in that chain also matures and moves along. And I describe this to people. It's like we're all standing side by side with a rope tied around our waist. I can take 2 steps forwards before I have to bring the 2 people adjacent to me forward as well. And if they can't move forward, then I can't move forward. So it's actually really the technique that Simon Wardley talked about, which was unrelated to organization transformation, gave me a deep insight into why is it that some organizations can't go beyond, say, Agile just within a division or Agile within technology only. It's because you can't step any further forward in those techniques, practices, and sensibilities without bringing other parts of the organization along with you. Does that make sense? Is it
100% does. And I think, again, probably through your career, what you've also experienced is technology was emerged. It was emerging as you were coming into, as you said, mainframes, and then the internet, and suddenly we're connected, and then we have cloud, and then we have. So now suddenly technology is probably the driving force and the protector and everything within a business. It's a heartbeat to a certain degree in order to go and then operate competitively. And that's been a big transformation. But what you're talking about is also that journey where now to be successful with, say, something like Agile, it has to be culturally embedded in the organization. Otherwise, it's just going to keep playing this.
Well, this is right. You actually triggered 2 thoughts. The first, and I'll cross my fingers to remember the other. The first is that depending on what background experience your CIO or CTO has had, and their level of recognition of this phenomenon that technology is basically one of the key success levers that an organization needs to pull to be competitive and to reduce costs and increase value delivery. That there is this, I've noticed that many CIOs and CTOs have an elevated sense of self-importance and value to the organization. That if you were looking at the seesaw of balance of recognition versus a contribution, CIOs and CTOs used to be held down. Like back when I was in A&L, technology report to finance, and had very little say of anything. whereas they now have a very big voice typically at the table and want a seat at the table with the rest of the executive leadership team, if not on the absolute higher echelons. It's just where all the CXO roles sort of emerge from. You've got your CMIO, CTO. That can be extremely impactful in a negative way, because it's not about the power and the leverage you can get out of technology, and that I therefore carry a big risk and or high contribution, must therefore be remunerated or given free license to make decisions that I can ignore the business need. That instead, it's for those that have got to that situation, there needs to be a counterbalance to say, actually, you are one of a team of people that make this organization function and succeed. You're just one function, right? You've got your finance, you've got your risk and controls function, you've got your people and capability functions. Each of these create a symbiotic system that works in this organization. So I do see this imbalance happening with technology being a sort of poster child of why we're successful.
I think it's interesting you did the way you described that. I think it's shifting again. And I think the emergence of cybersecurity, I think the emergence of AI, I think the emergence of data are all things that traditionally sat within the world of the CIO, and they're now breaking out as new CXO roles, or whatever you want to call them. And I was talking to somebody about this a few weeks ago. This again may sound slightly controversial, but I kind of see that, to use a metaphor, I see the CIOs becoming the GP. And then you've got all these specialists you get referred to when the problem has broadly been diagnosed, to go and speak to that person, how it represents and takes care of your health from their perspective.
Yeah.
And I think as a result, what we may see is the erosion of the CIO role in that way, because the specialist knowledge now required in each of those other domains is so deep and so impactful to the business that it may have just run its course.
Yeah, look, I can imagine a world where that is true. I can also relate to the fact that before that's true, one of the conditions that needs to be true is that that each of these roles have a very clear set of accountabilities and responsibilities, because at the moment it's, to use a very poor phrase, one throat to choke. Yeah, right. Is your CIO, your CTO, who is at the peak of the technology tree, and then everyone else then has a cascading set of accountabilities. But like that, when you start to distribute that level of accountability out to different CXO roles, it's incumbent upon the organization to understand the complexity of who do they go to for different problems and situations, as opposed to it used to be a very knowledgeable person who wisely would sit over this entire capability set and be able to help get to the right outcomes as quickly as possible.
Yes.
So yeah, there's a few things that would need to be true.
Definitely, there's a lot that needs to be true, and I think there's a bit of jostling at the moment. Is how I would describe it, because of that result. And I see that in organizations with sort of data coming out of tech and sitting over here as part of the COO's role, the CCO's role, and maybe security becoming more risk and connected with lead and finance again. And maybe quite rightly so, because it is a business risk. Ultimately, technology isn't really the enabler, but how that plays out, I've got no idea. But I think that's the evolution. If there's one thing, if you work in technology, you need to come to terms with, is that it's always evolving very quickly.
It is. But I'd also point out that I don't think that this is necessarily a good thing. And it's a situation that exists only because of the circumstances we're in. Remember, I talked about KPIs versus OKRs. Obviously, these roles like risk and cybersecurity and so on are sufficiently problematic and out of health in the organization that an objective of the organization has been to establish a core capability function with sufficient autonomy, control, decision-making rights, and governance ability that it elevates these roles up. Right. I would suggest that once it gets under control, that's when you go, that's a KPI that's now being met. We no longer need to have the organizational objective to have those roles elevated, and that they might then again lose underneath.
Well, and I think that's a very astute observation, because that's what I'm seeing a lot of at the moment. I'm speaking to CISOs that have been made redundant,
right?
Because they've gone in, it was brownfield, they've stood up a function of capability, probably been paid a lot of money and there's been a lot of investment in that. And now the business has achieved what it needs to achieve to this point. It doesn't need the investment of someone to oversee that. And a lot of those people that work in that world, that's what they enjoy. They enjoy going in, building things, ground up, getting out, and going off and doing the next projects. And I think, again, we've talked a fair bit through the conversation about ways of working and ways of thinking. And you hear lots of talk about the gig economy and all these kind of other things. But to me, that's part of it. It's the evolution of the roles in which we see any expectation that won't change.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that I would point out is that by creating those roles in governance silos, because it's problematic in the organization, it is adversely impacting the cross-functional team aspect, where you now need, depending on how an organization is implemented, to request someone from that new technical speciality to come in and help out. That's right. Whereas when it's working well, that might well be true, but not because it's a elevated sense of governance. It's about providing the right unique skill sets required to deliver the outcome of the team and embedding them in the team. That's right. And choosing. People say, well, hang on a second, you can't have one from every function in every team, because otherwise your headcount blowout is it's huge. The answer to that is you don't do it willy-nilly. What you do is you look at what is the effort and skill sets required to achieve this outcome. Is it effectively a full-time risk person or a full-time cybersecurity person, or is it maybe 50%, half FTE in effort and so on, in which case you're able to solve the cross-functional team, not by necessarily having to give one whole capable person in cybersecurity to every team, but instead it might be to overcome the understanding familiarity with that system and that problem, that there are people in the home competency that are assigned persistently to an area of that organization, like, right, you're always in retail banking and you're the cybersecurity expert for them. But we also, because there's not 100% work required for that team, we also need you to cover this other area as well.
Absolutely.
See?
But it's interesting the job design needed. I'm going to geek out a bit here now, but there's a lot of research that's in organizational psychology that shows you can take somebody with the same skill, put them in a different environment, and they're way less effective.
Yeah.
And you see this you take stockbrokers, you take the most high-performing stockbroker in Wall Street, you move them to another firm. If they move on their own, it takes 5 years to get that performance back to the same level, on average. You can take a surgeon and move them between different hospitals, and they have a different mortality rate based on the team, the culture, and everything else. One thing that I noticed as you described your move to Scotland is that you went with your boss, your previous boss, or someone you previously worked with, and then you brought another person from that team as well. Yeah. And that's a team working and moving together, because you know the way that you work, you have the trust, and you know you can be successful. Dare say if you'd moved to Scotland and didn't know anyone at RBS, your chance to success would have been significantly diminished. It doesn't mean that you wouldn't have been successful, but the path to success would have been different.
I guarantee I wouldn't have been successful because I would not have had the realm of influence that I had as a result of being part of that network.
And I think that it goes a long way. And I think what you're describing here, by the way, just to come back into that most recent point of the conversation, you may have a cybersecurity person that's here and has to go and be functionally involved in 2 or 3 other teams, but they're going to have a different degree of effectiveness at those teams depending on the connection that they form. So that involves a different type of leadership, a different type of purpose, connection, human skills. And I think there's so much talk about AI's coming, the robots are coming, they're here to take our jobs and so forth. I think my view is always embrace it, lean into it, and this whole opportunity to become more human and discover better ways to build that connection.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. So what you're describing in my head is when you're forming teams, it goes through the stages. It's the forming, the norming, the storming, and then the performing. And what you want to avoid is the mourning, when the team gets broken up and moves on. Yeah. Right. So part of what I drive and have recognized as success patterns is, first of all, try and achieve persistent teams, long-lived teams, where the same, not just the group, but the individuals in the group, for as best as you can manage that without constraining their career development and growth. Yep. So that you avoid the morning stage of teams. It's one of the fundamental reasons why projects and programs which assume a beginning and an end of the usefulness of that team of people is problematic, because if you projectize everything, then you are effectively assembling and disassembling teams, which you would know that as you form a team, they are really unproductive. You said for up to 4 years for an individual before they get back to being as performant as they were before. What company can afford to spend 25% of the cost of getting work done in waiting for the team to get their heads around what it is they've got to do, to work well together and to then be good at it, to then make the decision, right, job done, team disbanded, off you go. And all of those things are generally driven by the financial packet that we've put around achieving that outcome. And the capitalizing versus operationalizing the way in which you treat the money that was used to build the team. But that's another 10 rabbit holes to go.
Yeah. We're going to stop there and we're going to go to the lightning round.
Fantastic.
So I'm going to ask you if you would mind to pick 3 cards at random.
Right.
It's my chance. Not many people get this reference, but you lived in the UK. It's this countdown.
Yes,
You get a couple from the top and one from the bottom. So, but you get to pick wherever you want to take it from.
This one looks interesting. Do you want to pick the other one before?
Go for it. Yeah. Just take 3 and then we'll
take 3. Okay. There we go.
So flip it over, read the question, and give us your answer.
All right. Lightning round. Dog person or cat person? Definitely dog. Definitely dog person. Why? Because cats are so damn contrary that what you hope to get out of them as, I guess, your emotional companionship and physical companionship is totally at their whim. They will, maybe not. Whereas a dog, in general, with a pack mentality, is so damn loyal, so will love you regardless of what you do, for the most part. So yeah, I'm definitely a dog person.
You have a dog?
We do have a dog, and this is probably the second dog in my life that I've actually grown an attachment to. Her name is Gypsy. She's a Jack Russell short-haired border collie cross, which is really unusual. It was a farm dog that we felt the need to get during COVID. But some of these behavior patterns are really interesting. My wife will make sure that the dog is fed and walked every day. I'm often involved in those activities, but she's like the one that religiously makes sure that these things are true and enjoys the most the affection and the attention that Gypsy will give to her. But for some reason, Gypsy has chosen that I am the favorite parent, or maybe that alpha in the pack, or whatever that dog mentality is, because in the morning, no matter who fed her, she will then come and sit on the bed on my lap and won't move, even if she's beckoned away with food, with come, I want to pat you. No, we'll stay there until I've given her acknowledgement and given her love and so on. So it's an interesting new relationship with this dog, even though I never would have said that I was going to attach myself to another animal. Given my the number of pets that I've buried over my life, I don't think I do it. But yes, dog person and a Gypsy is a mate.
You guys.
Hello?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. If you could have one superpower, what would it be? Because I care deeply about how other people feel, I wish my superpower was always being able to recognize when I'm about to transgress that value that I want to hold in myself. If I could avoid hurting people, either emotionally or physically, then that would be the superpower that I would want.
Yeah.
I know it's a bit left field answer, but
That's nice.
oh, there you go.
What about the final one?
Final one. If you could change one thing about your industry, what would it be? Oh my God. So this is going to be controversial to most people. I wish that not just my industry, but business could remove performance and rewards mechanisms that are monetarily based. Because I think that one thing alone either drives or inhibits the most corporate brutality, non-human behaviors. Yeah, even they are human behaviors, but the ones that are into the superpower is asking for, that hurt people the most, that result in decisions that you wouldn't make if that wasn't the primary driver.
Yeah.
And people say, well, what's the alternative? Well, so having thought about the alternative and actually having tried to learn as much as I can about it, you might have seen things like, intrinsic motivation and what leads to intrinsic motivation, and that there were studies done that showed that physical effort, if you pay someone more money, then you can see a performance improvement, and the more money you pay them, the more that they put in until finally they can't actually perform anymore. That's not true of thought work. So, and given that all of us in this industry and most businesses are doing thought work, there is a plateauing of performance versus remuneration. The more that you pay someone, actually it has the opposite effect. The less performant they become.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of reasons for why, and I'm happy to enter into a debate over whether or not this isn't true. But I see that organizations who don't drive their organization forward through executive salaries and bonuses and that cascading down all through the layers, that it becomes people's primary goal, where they are banking on getting their bonus so that they can take the family on a holiday this year. It becomes the mentality, but it drives siloed behavior, what's in it for me syndrome, a whole bunch of really adverse behaviors. I came across a company. Actually, it was the reborn arm of ABN AMRO, who I was looking for an example of where an organization had executives that were had mastered being able to transfer seamlessly people and funds to where it was most needed in the organization dynamically at any time. And ABN AMRO was given to me as an example. So I was introduced to one of the execs and asked, how is this possible? And I leapt straight to the one thing that I thought would inhibit that type of decision making. That is, okay, if you came to me and said, say you're the retail MD of a bank and I'm the wholesale MD, if you came and said, I've got this mega challenge, it's going to require special funding to be able to address it, wasn't predictable, rah, rah, rah. My KPIs and my performance bonuses and so on are to preserve my share, even if it's of shared goals. It's to preserve my share of accolades, of career recognition, of things that will allow me to be more portal in my career and my financial rewards. They don't have that. They only had something like 12 people in the whole organization that had a performance incentive. The rest were salaried only, and salaried to the point that it was no longer distracting to them.
Yeah, interesting.
And so when they sat at their tables every month to discuss the performance of the business, and someone said, I need help, everyone at the table leaned in to say, what can I help you with? I could give you X number of, FTEs, X number of capability. I could stop the investment of this program or pause it, shift funds to you. If there was one thing that I would like to see changed in the industry, is how to achieve the collective outcome of the organization as the primary goal. And one of the major inhibitors I see is this whole instituted performance rewards.
Absolutely. It's interesting because they're a Dutch company.
Mm.
And I don't think this is true today, but when I first came into recruitment 25 years ago, Randstad, Dutch company, and I believe back then they didn't have bonuses for their consultants. It was a salary probably the highest in the industry.
Yep.
And had very high expectations and standards of what they were doing in that business, but it was a very low bonus model, whereas most of the recruitment industry, for probably as long as I can remember, has been much more bonus orientated. And it's actually one of my pet peeves with my industry. If I could change one thing about my industry, is that we as an organization get paid for the outcome, not the process.
Yeah.
So you hire someone, you pay me a fee. It doesn't matter whether the quality of what I just did. And we've built an entire industry. And I think most company, just as a generalization, that on balance, people would be a bit cynical or distrusting of the recruitment industry as a whole. But it's because of the way it's rewarded.
Yeah.
And I'd love to see, about this for years, a different way of, you wouldn't go to, Bain and say, well, we need if the strategy you put in place works. You pay for the
So they're unlikely to accept the challenge. But
yes, and most consulting firms would, or if they did, they would want exceptionally high premium.
Yeah.
Or the risk and reward model. But hey, that's a definite digression. It's supposed to be the lightning round, and I'm not living true to the spirit. The Haley's flapping away at the cameras to keep them because we're cooking them. A couple of last questions. Is there anything in your career you regret?
I'll give you two. One on the seemingly lesser significant impact, the other on a major personal impact. So the insignificant or less significant impact was back when I was at A&L, and I mentioned that we were responsible for systems. I was given as a first year programming programmer responsibility for the ship scheduling system. Now, for a shipping company, this is a critical piece of software, and I didn't know enough at the time about time zones. In fact, I don't think I knew anything about time zones really, except that daylight savings just miraculously kicked in and kicked out, and that when you went to a different place in the world, it was a different time. But I didn't understand the impact on scheduling systems. Now, so one morning I walked into work and I had someone say, "Oh, we just had the guys down at WebDoc tell us that," which is the shipping dock here that A&L owned and operated, that there's something odd about the time of arrival of this vessel. It's like out exactly by an hour. Well, that's weird. Don't worry about that. I can fix it. Straight into the database, change the time from whatever it was, 11 o'clock till 10 o'clock. I can't remember which direction it was. And then a little while later, I get another call to say, "Oh, same problem with this one." Okay, that's a bit weird. I have to investigate why this is happening, but I'll just fix that one. So I was progressively corrupting data because of a lack of understanding that the actual fix was change the time zone.
Yep.
And then everything would be back in order again. So as I progressively killed all of the accuracy of the data, eventually someone said, hey, stop doing what you're doing. This is what the problem is, and now we have to go and undo all of that. And I was called into the CIO at the time, and he said, "Do you know what you've done?" I went, "Yeah." And he said, "Okay, enough said." And then I went back out again. So that was one of my major mistakes and regrets. And I wish I'd known more before I was placed in a position of responsibility that could have such a big impact. Second, and probably more personally impactful one, is I regret having ever stopped learning that period that I talked about, because it's set me back so far. So I'll tell you the actual impact, and this also relates to, I guess, ties it quite neatly back to Jennings, who invited me to participate in this podcast. I was the director of software for Asia Pacific for this monolithic company, Reuters, and then suddenly found myself out of work. No one would employ me because roles that senior at that salary just didn't exist in Melbourne. Like, it was quite a unicorn role. And I had to, with Leonie's coaching, dumb my CV down just to be employable again. That is, delete experience, not refer to it, just to get a chance to get into an interview. Because that then effectively meant that my salary, when I did land a job, was, 25% of what it was before. At the time, that seemed reasonable because I was considering, becoming a taxi driver or something to just keep the family in, able to live and survive. That then very quickly led to throwing myself back into learning. I went to the PMI course. I rediscovered that my brain actually does do well enough to be able to absorb facts and interpret, synthesize, and use it usefully. And I then vowed to myself I would never stop learning anymore. So I now listen to as many audiobooks as I can on topics that I'm interested in. And whereas my wife will take her novels on holidays, I'll be sitting there with a DevOps handbook in my hand, thumbing through it, etc. That was the biggest regret I had, was to have stopped learning. I'd stopped learning for so long that it had such a life impact that if anyone else can hear these words and avoid that conundrum, that life challenge, that would be a piece of wisdom that I'll pass on.
Yeah, great. It's interesting. You, with both regrets, you pivoted and learned something and applied something. In the first case, it reminds me of, you've seen a cartoon where the guy sort of makes a massive multi-million-dollar mistake. He goes to his boss and sort of says, "You're going to fire me." And he says, "You're joking. We've just spent millions of dollars on your personal development."
Yes, exactly.
It's silver, which is a bit flippant, but always I quite like that outlook. Everyone makes mistakes. You learn from those, and I think it's foolish to companies that choose to torture. If it's not malicious or malintent, and it's a genuine learning, well, that's part of growth.
Yeah, exactly.
What's been the most significant feedback you've had in your career?
God, there's so many pieces of feedback, but the most significant one, I think you're also going to have to edit out this long pause.
I like the drama.
Right, suspense.
Yeah.
It was probably being made self-aware that I don't, that I need to consider the emotional impact on people in order to be able to gain the results that I'm hoping to gain from them. It actually caused me to then want to understand more about the psychology of work, the psychology of what drives people's behaviors. And it actually then led me to think about the how paralleled it is when you are a good leader, that is very similar to parenting, because some leaders aren't necessarily concerned about the impact on how their people feel and act and behave unless it's critically going to impact the outcome that they then need to achieve. Whereas having deep empathy and understanding for all of the people having a deep interest in not just their work life, but their personal life is one of the things that was triggered as a result of that feedback.
Yes,
So
interesting.
does that make sense?
It does make perfect sense. I think, again, I think if you look back at what leadership meant maybe 30 years ago, when you were kind of coming into the world of work and forming, it was very dictatorial in many ways. I'm the boss. I sit in the office.
Money control.
Money control. And I think that for the right reasons, by the way, has shifted enormously into where we are today. I think the slight risk of where we are today is that people become so concerned with the empathy side that they don't take action.
Yeah,
and there's a balance, I believe, between the two.
it is a different skill.
And I think it's finding that balance between care and consideration. But I do, I think what resonated with me with what you said there was getting to understand someone's personal story, their personal journey, investing a bit in them, understanding what makes them tick and where they come from. I think it helps you to make better decisions for that.
And what's going on in their world at the time?
That's right, and in their world. And it helps you to be able to communicate things. This actually goes back to something you said earlier. I was going to interject, but I'll let you going. But it's one of my favorite quotes is the biggest myth with communication is that it took place.
Yes, that's right. We sure did.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. I came across that fairly recently, and it made me smart because we often think we've had the conversation or we've conveyed a situation to somebody, but they walked away and had something completely different.
Well, it's why key learning such as, first seek to understand before you seek to be understood really resonated with me. The Stephen Covey book on 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I think had a story in it about a man that was on the subway. And the door was opened and in came all of these rowdy children that were disturbing all the passengers. And in slowly walked a man with his head lowered, apparently oblivious to all of the goings on with his children. And when he sat down, the way in which the story is told is clearly this man is not a good parent, not responsible. There was judgment on him and the way in which he was allowing his children to behave. And the challenge to him was, why are you allowing your kids to do this? And his response was, well, I guess they don't know how to behave at this moment because we've just had news that their mother's got cancer and she passed very soon. And the point of the story is we make judgment calls without a care or consideration for what's going on in someone's life or what might create the circumstances that make them then behave that way. I think it's really deeply important that we do try to understand other people's perspectives before we can then cast judgment or arrive at conclusions ourselves. Leadership needs to take that into account.
100%. Final question for you. You talked there about sort of sitting by the pool reading the DevOps handbook, which what else are you reading? What are you listening to? You're a lifelong learner, fascinated to get some inspiration.
So I listen to whenever there's a new publication that comes out of IT Revolution, which is Gene Kim's movement, the DevOps movement. Everything that comes out of that organization is quality, as in it has a very deep set of not just key messages, but proof points, stories, and a very, very well thought through way to tell those stories often. And the ones I like in particular are the ones like the Phoenix Project and the Unicorn Project, and the ones that actually use Goldratt's way of writing books, which was describe in a novelesque way a story about an organization and the characters and what they do and how they interact and the problems they're solving and how they eventually navigate their way out of big problems. I will read or listen to anything that comes out of IT Revolution before anything. In fact, if you only limited yourself to that reading, you've actually covered a lifetime's worth of knowledge in just those books.
What was that methodology? Sorry, you described where you describe essentially a situation or a problem, and then the characters and how they solve it.
A novelesque way.
Okay, so it's like a novel. Sorry, got it. I read a couple of years ago Stephen King I've read many Steve books, but it was a book on writing. It's Harry writes. And he basically revealed that he always starts with this obscure situational scenario. A mother trapped in a car, broken down in a farm with a child, surrounded by a pack of dogs. I think that's one of his books. How did they get into that situation, and how do they get out of the situation? And essentially, that's how he writes everything. That's how he kind of comes up with it. And his kind of theory of writing is he doesn't know what's going to come next, because he's the first reader. So he wants to be as interested in what he's going to come up with to write next, as opposed to this is the end, which ironically is, now I'm thinking about it, is actually Agile, right? To some degree. Here's an endpoint to write a book, and he starts with a problem and then just extrapolates that out to an interesting story.
Yeah, look, I absorb more when I listen to stories being told than I do about being taught a theory. And in particular, just because of damn it, that should have been the thing that I said was one of my greatest learnings was I try to understand how different people learn and absorb knowledge. Don't just assume that you can, for instance, run through the same training course and they'll all come out the same. So I'm very much a visual auditory person. That is, I need to see something being done, then do it myself and hear. If you put a book in front of me and tell me, just read this, and this is the schematic, precise instruction manual for doing something, I really, really struggle with that.
I think that, by the way, is the people talk about different learning styles and so forth. Again, I don't know the data or research on this, but it's interesting why we've seen such a rise of YouTube and TikTok videos, tutorials, and how-tos, and all this kind of stuff, right? It kind of speaks to watching somebody do something is a much more interesting experience to go and replicate than reading some instructions.
Well, it's so, and this is another rabbit hole, but I just want to dive down this one just for a second. One of the things that I do to disrupt the thinking of leaders just before I then retrain them is to kind of get them to unlearn. And in my experience, there's no such thing as unlearning. It's actually developing new neural pathways to achieve the same outcome, but doing it differently. And the classic example of this is Google reverse steer bicycle. Have you seen that one?
No.
Now, okay, so much education today. Reverse steer bicycle is something that was produced by a chap who essentially does video blogs, Smarto every day, I think it is. And this particular one was about how his he was presented with a bike from the engineers in his firm that were playing a practical joke on it, but the bike has two new cogs put on the steering column. If you turn the bike to what would normally be left, it actually steered the bike right, and vice versa. And they challenged him to ride it. And what he did was he said, I know how this works. I therefore have the knowledge to be able to do this. But of course he fell off it. He couldn't even get one pedal rotation round before he would fall off. And he practiced every day, falling off until at the end of about 9 months, he was able to ride the reverse steer bike competently, not as well as an old bike, but competently. But he had lost the ability to ride a normal bike, but only for an hour. Practice on the old bike for an hour.
Wow.
He was then able to switch between. Now, think about this in a real world context. If you've ever driven on the other side of the road in a foreign country, you are concentrating really, really hard on the fact that you're sitting on the other side of the car, the road positioning is a different place, often the indicators and gears are in a different place. Fortunately, accelerator and brakes are always in the same place, no matter which country you're in, but you're very, very nervous and you have to concentrate hard until you have developed the neural pathways such that you are unconsciously competent in doing it that way. And then you can easily switch from one to the other, which is the state that I find myself about, no matter where I am, no matter which vehicle. Actually, I drive buses, motorcycles, cars. I can get into anyone without having to think about what am I doing in this vehicle. It just happens naturally. So what this video blog describes this is that number one, you are developing new neural pathways, not actually unlearning and erasing the old ones, and you can rediscover the old ones quite easily. His 5-year-old son, by contrast, took 2 weeks to learn.
Yeah. Well,
And of course, this has got to do with the concept that when we're younger, we have higher degrees of neuroplasticity and we're able to learn a lot more. Teach your kids many languages when they're young. In fact, teach them everything that you possibly can when they're young, because with that, they will then have the ability to go and master many, many things later that they are no longer able to easily learn. And so the reason why I show this at the beginning of training leaders is to say, do you think you could have ridden that bike? So you've had something explained to you, you have cognitively understood it, but you haven't developed even the conscious competency to do it, let alone the unconscious competency to do it. So when you leave this room and think about how the organization is running today and what I'm asking you to do differently, understand that number one, it's going to be incredibly uncomfortable for you for a long time, that you will suffer the rubber band effect, that is snap back to the old behaviors and old ways of doing things because it's more comfortable to do it, even though it's not as, you don't believe it's as good as it will be if you continue down the path you're going on. And so I use that as a disruptor for their thinking, to get them to understand that we need to develop new neural pathways to achieve the same and better successful outcomes than the ones that we've learned and exercised without even thinking about it. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. Yeah, love it. We're going to wrap up there. So thank you. Thank you for your time. I've really enjoyed learning from you today and learning a lot of things I didn't realize. And I spent a long time recruiting in Agile and all these different areas. So it's been really interesting to kind of unpack some of those concepts and hear about your journey and you present very candidly as well. So thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me and allowing me to share.
Thank you for listening to Tales from Tech Titans, and be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcast. If you'd like to get more insights about tech careers, then check out the Ember, that's EMMBR LinkedIn page for the latest updates, articles, and engaging discussions.